Hi, I'm Ben with Under Pressure. Today we're going to be going over our C8 twin turbo kit. We're working on the install today. All right, for the hot side, we are going to start with our turbo mounts. This is also going to be the return built into it. Mirror direction turbos, our up pipes, down pipes, wastegate dumps, wastegates, and then the rest of the hardware, V-bands, and the bolts to hold the turbo together. First thing we're going to do is get the turbo mounts installed. We'll take the bolts off of the transmission mounts. This will slide on, and then we'll reinstall the bolts. We're going to leave all of this loose until we get everything pretty well set. Next, we're going to slightly install both of the up pipes, and then we'll get the turbo set in after that. Next, we're going to mock the turbos up. You'll need to get the center cartridges and the hot and the cold side lined up. These are already set and ready to go, but if you just loosen up these bolts here on both sides, you can clock these to whichever way they need to fit. And we'll use the two supplied Allens to hold them to the mounts. As with the rest of our kits, I'm using V-bands to hold all of our exhaust components together. We'll go ahead and get this installed between the up pipe and the turbo. We'll also have one here for the down pipe, the wastegate, as well as the wastegate dump. When you first get your turbo, you loosen up all the center bolts so that way you can move your different sides in order to get them to line up. Once you have those in the correct position, we'll go ahead and lock all these down and then pull the turbo back off, tighten everything up, and then we'll do the install. When you're installing your turbo onto your turbo mounts, make sure that you have your O-ring here. So it's going to go between the mount and the actual turbo itself. When you're installing the turbo on the mount for this up pipe, it's easier to go ahead and just set this up here and then get your V-band clamp onto the up pipe and to the turbo, and then set your bolts into the mount. Next up, we'll go ahead and install our wastegates. When you install your wastegate, make sure you have your fire ring in there. We'll go ahead and get the ports for the boost source plumbed in and facing this direction to get around and get to your boost source. It'll be on the charge pipe. All right, next section is going to be the cold side. We're going to have the intercooler, all of our T-bolts, left and right intercooler piping. We already have the boost source and IAT installed on these. We'll have the associated couplers, the blow-off valves, your map, the bolts to hold everything together, and we'll go ahead and start putting this in and kind of show you that process next. While installing the intercooler, you go ahead and mount your key sensor with supplied M6 1.0 right here. Tuck all of this underneath the intercooler and go ahead and install the cutout resistors as well. Next up will be our charge piping. We're going to go ahead and put the 2.5 straight onto the less bent side. Go ahead and slide it up in the car, put the straight on, and then we'll get the 90s from the top. The IAT one is going to be the driver's side, and we have the IAT bung on it. The 1/8" NPT bungs that are installed into the intercooler pipes are going to be used for your boost sources. You can just run your boost source over to your wastegate, over to wastegate. Now from the top, we'll go ahead and install these 90s. 90 goes from charge pipe to your intercooler piping. When you're installing that, make sure you try and keep everything as far away from heat sources as possible, as well as from the wiring and the electrical connectors down here. All right, up next we're gonna do the oiling system. So I'll go over that real quick. We have the oil scavenge pump. We're gonna have a 3/8 to 10 on your inlet and 3/8 to 6 on the outlet. This is gonna be your feed line, be from the engine to the T for the turbos. This will be a -6 90/90. This is gonna be from the scavenge pump to the oil fill neck, which will go to your -6 to quarter. That will tap into the fill neck on the top. These two 135 straights are gonna be for each turbo. This big -10 will be from your T from the turbos to your scavenge pump. The 90 will be to the scavenge pump, and this will be to each turbo. -4T, it'll go straight to the check valve like this, And then this here will go to the block. Your oil pressure sensor, your factory oil pressure sensor for the car goes here. And then you can either put a straight like that, or we can run the 90, depending on which turbos you're gonna use. If you're gonna run Turbo Smart, you'll need the oil pressure regulator. We'll run the 90 there to a union, to the pressure regulator, and then continue on normal with our oil feed lines. First thing we're gonna do is start out with the returns. Go ahead and attach your T, and then we're gonna put the return to each turbo. One here, one here. We'll go ahead and get that finger tight and get everything kind of lined up, and then tighten everything once we get everything in. Another part of our kit is we'll be replacing this box inside the subframe, which will allow our oil line to pass through this area right here. So we need to take the factory one out and just replace it with ours. For mounting the scavenge pump, we're gonna go about a 1/2 inch off the back, 2 3/4 from the passenger side, and about 3 1/8 from the driver's side. And go ahead and screw all 4 in and just drill holes off of the scavenge pump. When you install the oil return T to this 30-degree bend here, make sure your T is facing down, which will allow your oil to pool in here and the actual scavenge pump to suck it out a lot more efficiently. So we're doing the oil return line from the turbos to the scavenge pump. You go from the T through our box, over the sway bar, around the transmission. There is a connector right here that you want to try and stay off of. Go up over the subframe, around the motor mount, and then drop it down underneath the AC compressor, and we'll bring it in. It'll go right here to that scavenge pump once it's mounted. Now that we got the return pretty well set, we're gonna go ahead and start on the feed. Feed is gonna be the 90 to straight. I'll show you how to feed that through and where we're gonna terminate it on this end. All right, so we got this support right here. Go right along that, above the sway bar, then above the back of the subframe. You get that, gotta pop out. I'm gonna bring it to right about there for now. We'll go ahead and get the turbo side set, and then we'll work on the front. Now into that straight, we're gonna put the Racetronics check valve flow going towards the turbos. On the end of that, we're gonna put the T, and we'll put this onto the straight. All right, next to each turbo's feed, you're gonna have one that's about a 1/2 inch longer. The one that's a little bit longer is gonna be the right turbo or passenger side. In order for these to get put in, you're gonna have to loosen the 2 bolts holding the turbo down in order to kind of slide this in between your cold side, and just pick up just a little bit so that slides through. All right, this is our oil pressure adapter. So this is gonna be your factory oil pressure sensor right here. And then we're gonna put our feed for the turbos right up on top. And the 90 from your feed line, we'll go into that with the 1/8 inch to -4. Up next, we're gonna be working on the water to air part. Something like this is gonna be in the corner. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove, there's gonna be this plastic part on the front and then the fan on the back. So remove the fan off of it. We're gonna dispose of this part, and we're gonna replace it with an OEM radiator. We'll transfer all of the rubber grommetry and everything from the blank to the radiator, and then put the fan on as well, like this. And then we'll install this whole package in the car in order to cool down the water from the water to air intercooler. This panel will be hiding up in this fender well. There's 3 10 mils that'll allow you to take this bracket off right here and drop this down in order to slide this out. This is where we're gonna be reinstalling that radiator at. Just watch out when you're doing it. There is a vent up here in order to take off to get all this out. Part of the water to air is gonna be the secondary water pump. We're gonna mount that to the under tray along with your scavenge pump for the oil return system. We're just gonna mount that via the supplied 2 bolts. So we're just gonna put the end of the pump about a 1/2 inch back and then just center it in the actual tray. All right, next for the oil return, we're gonna go ahead and pull out the oil fill portion. It's just the 3 bolts right here, and you'll just slide this out just by popping this O-ring out. The reason we're pulling this out is so we can drill and tap for our oil return from the scavenge pump into the fill neck. So we'll go ahead and drill that out, tap it in there, and then just put this back in. Once we put it back, we'll go ahead and run our -6 9090 from the scavenge pump up to our fill neck for the return. All right, next we're gonna go over the rest of the stuff for the water to air. We're gonna have our fill cap, 10 hose clamps. We're gonna have 2 different size hoses. We got 5/8 and 3/4. And then we're gonna have our ice box that'll fit in the front area. And then a couple of M6 1.0 bolts and nuts in order to hold the fill cap on. So for our fill cap, we're gonna drill a 2 1/4 inch hole right here, opposite from the coolant, and we're gonna mount this underneath just like that. So you can see on the prototype, we have 4 holes. On the final rendition, we're only gonna have the 2. Just makes it a lot easier to be able to get this off without smashing your fingers on those 2 bolts. All right, once you get the radiator installed, we're gonna go ahead and install the fan in. You'll just plug it into the factory connection and just bolt it in like it is from the factory. While we're here, we can go ahead and run from the forwardmost port up to your fill neck, and then from your fill neck, you're gonna run your next 5/8 hose through the shock body and the body, and that's gonna go up to the actual intercooler itself. All right, next is gonna be the 5/8 hose. It's gonna go from the tank to the backmost part of the radiator, and we're just gonna run it along the existing coolant lines all the way to the back. This is the line we fed from the radiator through the body by the shock. We're just gonna go right here to that port on the intercooler. This will be our 3/4 hose. We're gonna go from the other side of the intercooler along the outside, drop through here, and then run this to our actual pump on the belly pan. We're gonna run through the same spot we did on the other side, just like that. Make sure when you're dropping down that you stay away from any heat source like manifolds, etc. There's a hole just over the crossover in the shield that you can run this hose through. All right, for the ice box, we're gonna go ahead and install that right into the front. The easiest way is just to pull the whole entire panel out. We're gonna use 4 M6 1.0 bolts to hold it into the bottom, right onto the floor. And then we're gonna put 2 holes here in order to run our lines through. We're gonna make sure those lines are about 2 inches up so you don't hit anything. So the fittings for your ice box, you're gonna have 1/2 inch to 3/4 barb on the bottom right. And then on the top left, you're gonna have 1/2 inch to 5/8 barb. So now up front, we're gonna do a little bit of wiring. We have 2 relays. These are gonna be for our water pump and the oil pump. We're just gonna drop this down and do a harness down underneath the car. We're gonna have main power, main ground, and then our signal going into the car. And we'll show you that in a minute. Now we have both of our pumps mounted to this underbelly. We'll go ahead and place the underbelly up. We're gonna use these 2 bolts right here. There's a little cutout to allow you to hang it. The rear scavenge pump is pretty heavy, so we're gonna put 2 support bolts here in order to just kind of support that weight while we're working on it. Once we have the scavenge pump in there, we can go ahead and hook up our 2 lines to our scavenge pump, the 10 going into the in and the -6 going to the out. When you're running your -6 90/90 from the oil fill, make sure you run on the front side of this fuel crossover in order to get here. And also don't hit anything that's hot. Hot stuff's bad, stay away from that. And then we can start working on getting all of the water to air lines hooked up in the front. So the one going from pump to the actual tank, and the one coming from the intercooler to the pump. So all of our hoses are gonna be a little bit long, so we can get to this point, we'll get it set up in there, and we can trim off whatever your excess is depending on the exact way that you route it. Maybe a little bit different, but there should be a little extra there for you, as well as the one that goes from the front of the pump to the tank up this way. So we'll put it on to the pump and then trim at the tank. For this connector, this is gonna be just the power. One wire is gonna be power for the water pump, and the other wire is gonna be power for the return. Now that we have everything ran from the back, this will be where we end all of our hoses for the water to air. You can do this a couple different ways. We can cut it directly to length here. You can push it back a little bit so that you have a little bit of wiggle room, but you're gonna trim this so that it fits there. The 5/8 hose is gonna go to the top, and then the 3/4 hose will go to the bottom. And again, same thing, you can either leave it a little bit long or you can trim it to the exact fit. We'll go and get that fit, and then that should button up the water to air setup. Next part we're gonna have is gonna be our accessories and a little bit of wiring, PCV, and the blow-off valve plumbing. So this here is our blow-off valve plumbing. We're gonna take this from 2 ports on the intake manifold, and then for our 2 blow-off valves here. This may change in the future, but for right now, we're gonna have something that look very similar to this. Next is gonna be our sensor tap for our baro breakout, as well as our IAT. This is gonna plug into the factory MAF location. This one's gonna be our map. It's gonna be a T-map instead of the regular map that comes with the car. We're gonna need a little spacer and a washer in order to hold that in. We're gonna have a breakout that goes in between the factory map and the T-map that we're gonna be installing. We're gonna have one wire that's gonna break out and go to the ECU for your IAT. We're gonna put that in IAT 2. And then lastly gonna be our PCV. And this is just gonna go to the 2 ports in the valve cover to the air filter. All right, from our map adapter, we're gonna have 1 wire lead that we're gonna run from the adapter over here to the ECU. We're gonna tap that in to IAT 2. This is the wire you'll see it going in. But yeah, that's the one we're gonna tap into. On the older cars, I believe it's a little bit different as far as location of the ECU, but either way, the wire should be long enough in order to reach either location. All right, for the sensor tap install, we're gonna use the supplied Allen and go right here to this existing hole. I'm just gonna pop that on like that. For the baro, use the spacer and the supplied 10 mil. Put the spacer on that side, 10 mil, and then we're gonna use this supplied hole here just to secure this up out of the way. You're gonna have your IAT, and this will go to your MAF. We'll run this around. This will tie into the factory MAF connector. This end will tie into the MAF itself, and then you'll have your lead for your IAT. And that guy will just run down here and tap into the IAT. Now your sensor tap is installed. All right, so the last parts we're gonna install onto the kit are gonna be the downpipes, the dump tubes, and the air filters. We're gonna get those on, and then we'll kind of loosely set them so we can get the bumper on, and then we can finalize and tighten everything up. When you get your dumps on, you're just gonna wanna keep it nice and just so you can just barely move them so you get everything lined up here in a minute. And the air filters, one of them is gonna have a hole for your PCV to be able to pop into. All right, now we got the bumper placed. We can go ahead and start doing the final adjustments on getting these guys set in there exactly how you like them. There is a bit of movement in there. If you do have to kind of move this side, you can also loosen up the main turbo mount in order to move that around a little bit and get everything lined up exactly how you like it. But after that, pretty much put everything back together how you found it, and then we'll be done with this installation. Now we got this installation all buttoned up, we'll throw in the dyno and see how much this thing makes.